Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. Before I begin this video and you'd like to use OCD Recovery's coaching services, please reach out to Phil at ocdrecovery.com and he'll get back to you as quick as he can. So yeah, today guys, I just wanted to speak about the reality of exposures. Now, before I start with that, exposures, not everything is going to need them, sensory motor, fear of fear, where the sensations are very much the exposure. They're not going to be necessary, all right, because they're going to be there by default. But yeah, in many cases, you will need the exposures. They're not the gold standard, of course, as we say. Yes, they're an important part, but there's also the belief systems that come in too. Having said that, they do still need to be done. And, I wanted to give some realities into doing exposures right now. Imagine somebody has never spoken in front of a big crowd of people before, right? There's going to be that time when that happens. Maybe there's a politician out there, maybe there's a big keynote speaker who's never done that, right? The first few times that they would have spoken in front of people would have been painful, right? It would have been that learning experience. It would have been getting used to that discomfort that comes from speaking in front of that crowd of people. It would have been getting used to those feelings of discomfort and almost the fears of shame and the rejection that might be fueling that. Those first few times are going to be painful, right? And maybe before the person did go to do those speeches in the first instance, their body was pulling them away from that, saying, no, it's too scary, I can't do that, right? But those situations when you feel uncomfortable are the moments where freedom lies and where you really go through that. And you make that jump when it feels wrong and it feels ready and your body's screaming at you. That is when you really need to go towards that, and especially in an OCD sense, right? Before you do your exposures, it's going to feel tough and it's going to be painful when you do your first few exposures, right? It's going to feel painful. I remember with me, I had a big fear of talking to women, right? And I was scared about that for a long period of time. I would teeter around that. I'd make up an excuse not to do that. But of course, I was just stuck in that mental prison and that mental trap where I wasn't having those things that I wanted in life because I was scared, right? And the first time I did that, it was painful. I came across as a bit probably awkward, a bit unconfident, maybe made the other person feel a bit uncomfortable. And that was just the reality of doing that. But I knew that I had to really step through the fire with that. Otherwise, I'd be living from this lens of fear for the rest of my life, right? So I had to really realize and understand that the first few times in which you are exposing yourself to that particular thing, it is going to feel painful. And like with any exposure in OCD, the first time you do that, it could be watching a film, it could be going into the kitchen, it could be being at home with your family, it could be wearing an LGBT sticker like I used to. The first few times that you do that, it's going to be painful and your body's going to be screaming at you because you're confronting that thing that you're very much scared of, right? Your body very much trying to keep you safe, and it's trying to make you not go towards that by producing those uncomfortable sensations and making you sort of try and think that it's a danger, right? So your body needs to adjust and adapt to that by behaviorally showing yourself that this thing isn't so scary and really trying to wear that discomfort whilst you go through the fire. And of course, not responding with any compulsions and following it up with any safety behaviours, of course. So yeah, you work on the belief systems around that as well, alongside the exposures. But you've got to realise that in those first moments, it's going to feel like it's going to get worse before it gets better. And your body is very much going to be screaming at you, and every fibre of your being is going to want you to pull away from that and not do that particular thing, right? But you've got to remember that you're not doing that for no reason. You're not doing that exposure for no reason. You're not doing that core fear for no reason. You're doing that in order to get your life back. You're doing that in order to get that freedom of what waits on the other side. And I'm not saying that you do that exposure or whatever it is that you've been putting off and bang, that's it. No, but the brain has to be shown a reason for it not to be scared. And if you're still scared of that exposure, then your brain is still going to be scared because it doesn't believe you, right? As you do that, you get comfortable with it. You really get comfortable with that discomfort. You don't go into the mindset of doing that fear or exposure and all your discomfort being gone forever. No, you want to sit with that discomfort and get through it. And over time, you repeat that process whilst working on the belief systems. And then the brain realizes that this response isn't necessary, that fear response, until you get very comfortable being in that particular scenario that you would have found scary before, right? So you've got to think, and from that angle of compassion as well, yes, it is going to be difficult. Yes, it is going to be hard. Doing an exposure or facing a fear isn't easy. If it was easy, then we'd do it straight away with no problems. But, it's going to be tough. you might feel triggered for a period of time after doing that exposure. All right, you might feel triggered for days and even weeks, and you might have that rumination and those intrusive thoughts, and that makes you even more scared to do the exposure because of what's going to happen after it, because of that after effect, because of the way that you're going to feel. But the only way out is through. Otherwise, you're going to be losing your life to OCD. It's more of a risk not taking the risk. There's a risk either way. There's a risk doing the exposure and being triggered, and there's a risk not doing it and risking being stuck with OCD forever, right? So you've got to think, right, how can I start taking my life back bit by bit? Even when I don't feel ready, even when I feel like my body's screaming at me, those could be the moments that you really push towards that and go towards that discomfort, because that's what you want to feel. You want to get good at sitting with that discomfort. So in actual fact, doing it in a moment when you don't feel ready is going to be the best thing, and you're going to have to improvise. You're going to have to ride it out. Like for me, for example, speaking to women, I had to sort of navigate that and learn for myself by doing. You learn by doing, you show the brain by doing. And the more that I did that, the better that I got at it, and the less scared I was about that. And now it's just not even a big deal. And I think, well, I wish I did that before. I wish I didn't take so much time to do that, because I could have been so much freer before. So there's going to be a time where you just have to go through that fire, it's going to get worse before it gets better. It's almost like with me, there was a time when I had to cut out a lot of unhealthy foods because I had problems with my stomach. And initially cutting out the treats and the snacks and whatever was very hard, because it was like a comfort for me. But as I did that, as I went through the fire and sat with the discomfort of not having those foods, after a while it became a lot more easier to cut those out, and the cravings went down, and now I find it so much easier to eat healthy. Again, I'm not saying you can't have bad food, but just for me in that situation, that's what I had to do. So you do that initial movement, that initial exposure, that initial behavior where it feels hard and uncomfortable. But as you do that over time, it does naturally get easier. And that's not just a reassurance, it's just the reality of it, because the brain adapts, it adjusts and realizes that it's not that scary. All right. So you got to think, you can't put off this exposure forever, because OCD is going to know that. It's just going to be lurking in the background, and it's going to be unlocking the next level up in your journey. And your brain subconsciously knows that exposure that you're putting off. It knows where the freedom lies. And the more that you just put that off, the more that you're just going to stay stuck with that forever. So you need to strike while the iron's hot. You need to do it now, because time is running out. Time is ticking on. We're getting older, and you need to, take your life back as soon as you can. So there's no time like the present. Really go through that fire, because you're going to have to cross that bridge one day. You can't keep putting it off. It's almost like when you're doing an exam, and you keep putting that exam off, you keep putting that revision off, or doing that assignment, put it off to the last minute, and then you run out of time and you don't get to do the assignment, and then you fail, right? Imagine that with life. You run out of time because you've used up all your time putting it off, and that's when you fail. So you need to make sure that you save yourself enough time. In a life context, you need to save yourself enough time for the rest of your life to be free, and you do that by doing the exposure, all right? So yeah, it's never going to feel right. It's never going to feel ready. It's going to feel scary, but take the leap. Your future self is thanking you.